Losing the plot. Why the left needs to revisit the debates it tried to avoid and what we can learn from Trevor Noah by Liam Donovan, July 6th, 2025. Read by an automated voice. The silence that cost us everything. I believe in universal health care. I believe in a progressive tax system that closes loopholes and reinvests in the communities that need it most. I believe in humane but effective immigration reform, where the best people, regardless of how they arrived, can earn citizenship through good faith and hard work. These aren't moderate positions, they're progressive, serious ones. But lately, I find myself politically homeless. The right, at least as shaped by the Trump movement, has become a hollow shell, loud, theatrical, and unmoored from principle. It operates like a personality cult, not a political party. That alone should be disqualifying. And yet, Democrats still manage to lose ground to it. Why? Because instead of asserting a clear, confident, grounded vision, the Democratic Party too often lets its most extreme activist voices define its image. And when they're not defining it, they're distorting it, using rhetoric so hyperbolic, moralistic, and alienating that it turns off voters who would otherwise be open to progressive goals. Republicans, especially in the Trump era, speak in the language of common sense, even when their policies are deceptive or cruel. The far left speaks in the language of absolutes and accusations, even when their values are noble. And most Americans, confronted with that choice, understandably tune out the side that sounds like it's trying to make them feel stupid, guilty, or complicit in white supremacy or genocide. That's not an indictment of progressive values. It's an indictment of progressive communication, leadership, and strategic courage. Reclaiming the ground we gave up. If Democrats want to regain credibility, especially with working class and independent voters, they can't keep avoiding the cultural flashpoints that Trump and his allies so effectively exploited. They need to confront them head-on, not with pandering, not with silence, but with clarity, with moral seriousness, with the courage to say, yes, we care about justice, but we're not going to let activist extremes speak for everyone. In this essay, I want to show what that could look like by revisiting one of the most revealing missed opportunities of the last few years, Trevor Noah's 2022 interview with trans athlete and activist Veronica Ivy. Why revisit it now? Two reasons. First, it offers a textbook case of what happens when the left refuses to challenge bad arguments from within. If we don't revisit moments like this, they stay frozen in time, circulating online and weaponized by the right to define what the left supposedly believes. If we want to stop losing those battles, we have to start engaging in them. Second, moments like this force us to think clearly. They're reps, they're training. They help us sharpen our ideas and articulate our values without hiding behind buzzwords or weaponized guilt. We need more of that. We need leftist voices who can defend what they believe, not just hide behind slogans or identity armor. Because right now, too many progressives avoid these conversations entirely, fearing backlash from their own side more than critique from the other. The Trevor Noah interview, a missed chance at clarity. In 2022, Trevor Noah sat down with Veronica Ivy to discuss one of the most politically and emotionally loaded topics of the era, trans women in women's sports. It was clear from the outset that Trevor wasn't trying to provoke or challenge for the sake of spectacle. Quite the opposite. He was thoughtful, careful, and generous. He chose his words deliberately, framing his questions with empathy and caution, not because he was afraid, but because he was trying to create a space where nuance could live. And it's important to remember the context. In 2022, the left was still in a posture of defensive solidarity. After years of anti-trans legislation and culture war attacks from the right, there was genuine fear among liberals and progressives that raising concerns about fairness, even in good faith, would be used by the right to demonize trans people. Trevor's caution wasn't weakness. It was a strategic attempt to engage without giving ammunition to bad actors. But that caution also came at a cost. It meant Trevor had to speak in restrained, almost impotent language, while Ivy could speak freely, forcefully, and morally. The resulting dynamic wasn't a conversation. It was asymmetrical theater, and to many ordinary viewers, it came off as comically lopsided. The setup, a diplomat meets a doctrine. Trevor opened with sensitivity. He didn't speak for himself at first. He referenced what some people might wonder. He gently acknowledged the complexity of the issue. You could see that he was trying to build a shared foundation, a conversation, not a confrontation. This wasn't cowardice, it was strategy, and it was respectful. But Ivy didn't engage with the conversation in that spirit. From her first response, she asserted that there was no debate to be had. Trans women are women, full stop. Sports participation is a human right. Any attempt to distinguish between trans women and biological women, even in the context of athletic performance, was cast as inherently offensive. The term biological woman itself was reframed as not only inaccurate, but insulting. "I'm biological and I'm a woman," Ivy said, effectively collapsing the distinction between trans women and cis women into a single, unquestionable identity category. And from there, she used that reframing as a shield against the very question Trevor was trying to raise. Trevor didn't push back, not because he agreed, but because he couldn't find a way forward without triggering the activist defenses that had already been built into the structure of the conversation. The fragile white women moment, a trump card with no real weight. One of the most memorable and revealing moments in the interview came when Ivy claimed the real reason people object to trans women competing in women's sports is that fragile white women are uncomfortable with black and brown bodies. Let's be clear, this wasn't Ivy's core argument. It was a rhetorical grenade. It didn't advance the conversation, it detonated it. And it's a perfect example of how the far-left activist class often wields whiteness as a trump card, not as a thoughtful point, but as a way to shut down dissent before it starts. This move works in certain progressive spaces because pushing back against anything framed as calling out whiteness is considered off-limits. If you question it, you're labeled complicit in white supremacy. If you ask for clarification, you're told you're fragile or unaware of your own internalized racism. So the accusation floats above scrutiny. But in this context, the move was absurd, and the irony was obvious. Here you had a white Western trans woman explaining racism to Trevor Noah, a mixed-race man born in South Africa under apartheid. And because of the ideological etiquette Trevor was trying to honor, because he was doing everything right by activist standards, he didn't push back. But this was exactly the kind of moment where pushback would have mattered. Trevor could have, and arguably should have, responded by pointing out that this isn't just a conversation about white women's discomfort. People of all races, backgrounds, and political leanings have genuine questions about fairness and competitive integrity in sports. To reduce it to fragile whiteness isn't just inaccurate, it's alienating. The boxing analogy, a reasonable question, dismissed as moral failure. Trevor made one last effort to inject nuance. He introduced the idea of weight classes in boxing, a calm, rational analogy. He wasn't making a personal judgment about trans athletes. He was pointing out something obvious. Sports already account for physical differences to preserve fairness. That's not an act of exclusion. It's part of the system. It was a moment of clarity that could have opened the door to real discussion. And for a second, it seemed like it might. Ivy acknowledged that she understood the logic, that she could see where Trevor was coming from. But then she pivoted, again. Unless you're willing to overhaul all of sports, she argued, raising the fairness issue in this one case was selective and therefore suspect. The implication, if you're not proposing a total rethinking of all athletic competition, you're targeting trans people. The content of the argument wasn't challenged. Trevor's motives were. Why activist rhetoric keeps losing people. This is where I want to be clear. I believe activists have a place in our society. Often, they are the ones who move the conversation forward when institutions lag behind. But I worry that many modern activists, particularly those entrenched in online progressive spaces, have become trapped by hyperbolic language and ideological rigidity. They paint themselves into illogical corners, where the only tools they allow themselves are moral shame and identity absolutes. That's how we end up with double standards, contradictions, and complete detachment from common sense. These tactics don't build bridges, they burn them. And that's why these flashpoints matter, not because the right will exploit them, they will, but because we need to reclaim them. What's changed since then, and why it's still not enough? In the years since that interview, Democrats have quietly shifted their approach. After the political backlash of 2024, leaders have begun to soft-pedal trans issues, avoiding new policy fights, letting some past initiatives roll back, and emphasizing kitchen table issues instead. I get it. Many in Democratic leadership probably never fully agreed with far-left rhetoric, but they were too scared to be labeled bigots. So they said nothing, or worse, signaled support. That silence backfired. Now, their new strategy is to say less and focus elsewhere, but voters can see through it. The retreat feels evasive, not thoughtful. It looks like defeat without acknowledgement. This is why revisiting moments like the Trevor Noah-Veronica Ivy debate is so important. It's how the left shows it's willing to learn, willing to say what went wrong, willing to lead again. We can't just ignore these moments and hope they go away. We have to confront them head on, not to appease the right, but to regain the trust of the people we claim to represent. It shouldn't be this easy to lose to Trump. The Trump GOP has no real values, just loyalty to Trump, and yet, somehow, they keep gaining ground. That's not just a Republican problem, it's a Democratic failure of clarity, courage, and credibility. We can fix that, but not by avoiding tough conversations. We fix it by owning them. A final thought experiment. Sometimes, maybe unfairly, maybe hyperbolically, I imagine someone like Veronica Ivy having to sit across from a Haitian mother with TPS status, now being deported under Trump's crackdown. Would she explain to this woman that her suffering is a necessary sacrifice in the fight to ensure Leah Thomas can dominate women's NCAA swimming? Would she really claim that opposing this is the same as erasing trans existence? Of course not. But the fact that I can imagine it, even as a thought experiment, shows how distorted progressive priorities can look when symbolic victories are elevated above real-world suffering. When that happens, the people who pay the price aren't Twitter influencers. They're the very people progressives claim to fight for.